You're a rational person. You make thoughtful decisions. You weigh consequences. And yet, put you in a crowd and something terrifying happens. Your individual identity dissolves. Your moral compass spins wildly. You become capable of things you'd never do alone. The mob doesn't think, it feels, it reacts, it destroys. Gustave Le Bon discovered this over a century ago, and his findings still haunt psychologists today. Crowds don't add intelligence, they subtract it. In the next few minutes, you're going to understand exactly why you lose yourself in groups, why protests turn violent, why online mobs destroy lives, why your personality disappears in a stadium, and more importantly, how to protect the one thing that matters most, your mind. The hive mind. Picture a single drop of water. It has its own identity, its own path. Now imagine that drop falling into an ocean. Where does it go? It becomes the wave. It becomes the tide. It loses itself completely. This is exactly what happens to your brain in a crowd. In 1895, French psychologist Gustave Le Bon published a book that would change how we understand human behavior forever. He called it The Crowd, a study of the popular mind. His conclusion was disturbing. By the mere fact that he forms part of an organized crowd, a man descends several rungs in the ladder of civilization. Le Bon observed something that scientists are still confirming today. When individuals merge into a group, their cognitive capabilities literally decrease. Brain imaging studies from UCLA show that being in a crowd activates your amygdala, the fear and emotion center, while suppressing your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for rational thinking. You're not imagining it when you feel different in a crowd. You are different. Your brain chemistry shifts. Your decision-making processes change. The person you've spent your whole life becoming temporarily ceases to exist. But here's what makes this truly unsettling. Anonymity effect. Have you ever wondered why people do things in groups they would never do alone? Why someone who volunteers at animal shelters can join a mob destroying property? Why the kindest person you know can become cruel online? The answer lies in something psychologists call deindividuation. When you're anonymous, when you blend into a crowd, your self-awareness drops dramatically. You stop monitoring your own behavior. That internal voice that usually asks, "Is this right?" goes silent. Hidden identity equals hidden conscience. Philip Zimbardo, the psychologist behind the infamous Stanford prison experiment, found that anonymity is the gateway to cruelty. In his studies, people wearing hoods or uniforms consistently behaved more aggressively than those whose identities were visible. Think about it: costumes at riots, usernames online, matching jerseys at games. These aren't coincidences. They're psychological triggers. When you feel invisible, accountability disappears. And here's the uncomfortable truth. You're susceptible to this too. Every single one of us is. If this pattern is starting to make you recognize something in yourself, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring the depths of your psyche with me. Because what comes next explains why mobs feel so intoxicating. Emotional contagion. Emotions spread faster than any virus ever could. When you're in a crowd, you're not just observing other people's feelings, you're catching them. Neuroscientists discovered something remarkable in the 1990s: mirror neurons. These specialized brain cells fire not only when you perform an action, but when you see someone else perform it. When you watch someone cry, your brain partially simulates crying. When you see anger, your brain rehearses anger. In a crowd, this multiplies exponentially. You're not mirroring one person, you're mirroring hundreds, thousands. The emotional intensity becomes overwhelming. This is why peaceful protests can suddenly explode into violence. One person throws a rock, others feel that aggression ripple through them. Their mirror neurons fire, their hearts race, their fists clench. Within minutes, the mood of an entire crowd transforms. Madness is rare in individuals, but in groups, parties, nations, and ages, it is the rule. The philosopher understood what science would later prove. Collective emotion bypasses individual reason. And once you're swept up in that emotional current, swimming against it feels almost impossible. But there's something even more powerful driving mob behavior: social proof trap. Here's a terrifying experiment. In the 1960s, Psychologist Stanley Milgram asked people to look up at an empty sky on a busy New York street. When one person looked up, only 4% of passers-by stopped. But when 15 people looked up, 86% of passers-by stopped and stared at absolutely nothing. Nothing. We are wired to follow the crowd. It's called social proof, and it runs deeper than conscious thought. Your brain evolved in small tribes where following the group meant survival. If everyone ran, there was probably a predator. If everyone ate something, it was probably safe. This ancient programming doesn't distinguish between running from a lion and joining a Twitter mob. Group behavior feels like truth. When you see thousands of people believing something, your brain interprets it as evidence. When you see hundreds attacking someone online, part of you assumes they must deserve it. This is why propaganda works. This is why cancel culture spreads. This is why ordinary Germans joined the Nazi Party, not because they were evil, but because the human brain is catastrophically vulnerable to social proof. And this leads us to something even darker: diffused guilt. In 1964, Kitty Genovese was murdered outside her apartment in New York City while 38 neighbors watched or listened. None of them called the police. For decades, psychologists have studied this case as an example of the bystander effect, the phenomenon where the presence of others decreases the likelihood of individual action. But it goes deeper than inaction. When responsibility is shared, it evaporates completely. In a mob, no single person feels accountable. Each individual thinks, "I'm just one of many. My action doesn't matter. Someone else will take responsibility." This is how atrocities happen, not through individual psychopaths, but through collective diffusion of guilt. The person throwing a punch in a riot doesn't feel like a violent criminal. They feel like a participant in something larger. Their personal morality gets outsourced to the group. Individual becomes crowd, becomes mask. The executioners in history's worst genocides weren't monsters. They were ordinary people who had surrendered their individual conscience to the collective. This is the terrifying mathematics of mob mentality. The more people involved, the less each person feels responsible. But here's where it gets personal. Digital mobs. The internet has created the largest mob in human history, and it's operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Every psychological mechanism that drives real-world mobs is amplified online. Anonymity, complete. Emotional contagion, instantaneous across continents. Diffusion of responsibility, infinite. The digital mob never sleeps and never forgets. Twitter, Reddit, Facebook. These platforms are psychological experiments running on billions of people simultaneously, and the results are disturbing. Research from NYU found that each additional moral or emotional word in a social media post increases its spread by 20%. The algorithms literally reward outrage. They select for mob behavior. Anger spreads faster than truth. And here's what's different about digital mobs: they leave permanent records. One tweet from a decade ago can destroy a career today. The mob can form in hours and devastate a life before the target even knows what happened. You've probably participated in this without realizing it. A retweet, a pile-on comment, a moment of joining the collective outrage. Social media is making us more tribal and less truthful. The psychologist is right. And this tribal instinct is exploiting something even more ancient. Us versus them. Your brain is a tribal machine. It evolved to identify who belongs to your group and who doesn't, and to treat these categories very, very differently. Psychologist Henry Tajfel conducted experiments where he assigned people to groups based on completely meaningless criteria, like their preference for abstract paintings. Even with these arbitrary divisions, people immediately showed favoritism toward their own group and hostility toward the other. Give humans a group identity, and they will create enemies. This is called minimal group paradigm, and it reveals something uncomfortable about human nature. We don't need real differences to hate each other. We just need the perception of different teams. Mobs exploit this relentlessly. Political rallies, sports rivalries, online fandoms. They all create an us versus them dynamic that activates our most primitive neural circuits. Blue team plus red team equals conflict. And once you've categorized someone as them, your empathy for that person literally decreases. Brain scans show reduced activity in empathy-related regions when viewing out-group members in distress. You don't just dislike them, you become neurologically incapable of fully recognizing their humanity. This is how ordinary people commit extraordinary acts of cruelty. And this brings us to perhaps the most disturbing mechanism of all: collective madness. Throughout history, entire societies have gone collectively insane. The Salem witch trials, the Tulip Mania, the dancing plague of 1518, where hundreds of people danced themselves to death in the streets of Strasbourg. These weren't metaphors. These were real events where group psychology overwhelmed individual sanity. Mass hysteria. Modern psychology calls these episodes of collective behavior mass psychogenic illness. They occur when emotional contagion, social proof, and mob psychology combine to create a feedback loop that spirals beyond any individual's control. And here's what should terrify you. We're not immune. Men go mad in herds while they only recover their senses slowly, one by one. That was written in 1841, but it could describe social media in 2024. The QAnon phenomenon, the meme stock craze, the moral panics that sweep through cultures and evaporate just as quickly. Sanity is a solitary activity. When you're alone, you can think. When you're in a crowd, physically or digitally, thinking becomes nearly impossible. The emotional noise drowns out the signal of reason. But understanding this gives you something powerful: defending your mind. Now that you understand how mobs work, how do you protect yourself? The first line of defense is simply awareness. Knowing that your brain becomes less rational in groups is itself protective. When you feel the pull of collective emotion, you can pause and ask, is this my feeling, or am I catching it from others? 1. Recognize the emotional contagion happening. 2. Physically or mentally step back from the crowd. 3. Ask what you would think if you were alone. 4. Wait 24 hours before joining any outrage. 5. Seek information that contradicts the group consensus. These steps seem simple, but they require tremendous effort because they go against your evolutionary programming. Your brain wants to merge with the group. It feels safe. It feels righteous. The crowd offers belonging at the cost of your identity. Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic emperor, faced mobs regularly in ancient Rome. He wrote advice that remains powerful today. The object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. Sanity requires solitude, at least occasionally. It requires the willingness to think thoughts that the crowd would reject. It requires the courage to remain an individual when everything in you screams to belong. But there's one more thing you need to understand. Reclaim yourself. Here's the final truth about mob mentality. Every crowd is made of individuals who chose to surrender. No one forces you to lose yourself. You make that choice, usually unconsciously, but it's still a choice. And that means you can make a different one. Your mind is your territory. The philosopher Soren Kierkegaard wrote that the crowd is untruth, not because groups are inherently bad, but because truth requires individual responsibility that crowds dissolve. When you think with the mob, you're not really thinking at all. You're performing a script written by collective emotion. Dropping the mask means seeing clearly and thinking for yourself. This doesn't mean isolation. You can belong to groups without losing yourself in them. You can feel collective emotion without letting it override your judgment. You can participate in movements while maintaining your individual conscience. The key is staying conscious, staying present, staying you even when the crowd pulls at your edges. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance, especially vigilance over your own mind. You now understand what most people never will: the psychological mechanisms that turn individuals into mobs. Use this knowledge. Guard your mind. Because in a world that increasingly thinks in crowds, The individual thinker becomes revolutionary. You've just seen inside the machinery of mob mentality, the hive mind that dissolves identity, the anonymity that silences conscience, the emotional contagion that hijacks reason, the social proof that makes lies feel like truth, the diffused responsibility that enables atrocity, and the tribal instincts that turn neighbors into enemies. Whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it is time to pause and reflect. This knowledge is now yours, not to make you paranoid of every group, but to make you aware of what happens when you stop thinking for yourself. The crowd will always be there, offering the comfort of belonging, the thrill of shared emotion, the relief of outsourced responsibility. But your mind belongs to you. Guard it, question the consensus, feel the pull of the mob, and choose not to be swept away. If you made it this far, comment "Mind Sovereign" below, because you've just separated yourself from everyone who lets the crowd think for them. Welcome to the Psyche Project. If this made you see crowds differently, hit like and subscribe. Understanding yourself is the work of a lifetime. See you in the next video.